The autumn rain drummed against the tall windows of Clarence House as King Charles III sat alone in his private study, surrounded by towers of documents that required his attention. The coronation had been months ago, but the weight of the crown still felt heavy on his shoulders, both literally and figuratively. At 74, he had finally achieved what he had been preparing for his entire life. Yet something felt incomplete, hollow even. The room was dimly lit by a single desk lamp, casting long shadows across the mahogany furniture that had witnessed decades of royal decisions. Charles rubbed his tired eyes and reached for another stack of papers when his fingers brushed against something unexpected. Hidden beneath a pile of constitutional documents was a small, leather-bound book with faded golden edges. His heart stopped for a moment as he recognized the delicate handwriting on the cover, property of Diana Spencer. The diary was one he had never seen before, somehow overlooked during the sorting of Diana's belongings after her tragic death in 1997. For 26 years, this intimate piece of his late ex-wife had remained hidden, waiting to be discovered. Charles held the diary with trembling hands, feeling the weight of memories and regrets flooding back. Diana had been gone for over 2 decades, but seeing her handwriting again brought back a rush of emotions he had spent years trying to suppress. The woman who had captured the world's heart, who had become the people's princess, and who had shared 2 beautiful children with him, remained a constant presence in his thoughts, especially during moments of solitude like this. He hesitated before opening the cover, knowing that whatever lay inside would likely stir up feelings he had worked hard to compartmentalize. Their marriage had been one of the most scrutinized relationships in modern history, played out under the relentless glare of media attention. The fairy tale wedding watched by millions had eventually crumbled under the pressure of public expectation, personal incompatibility, and the complex dynamics of royal life. The first entry was dated June 15, 1981, just a month before their wedding. Diana's handwriting was neat and careful, the words of a young woman barely 20 years old, trying to make sense of her rapidly changing world. Tomorrow I will have my final dress fitting. I keep looking at myself in the mirror and wondering if I'm ready for all of this. Charles seems so confident, so sure of everything, while I feel like I'm drowning in protocols and expectations. Everyone keeps telling me how lucky I am, how this is every girl's dream, but sometimes I just want to run back to my little flat and listen to music without anyone watching my every move. Charles felt a sharp pain in his chest as he read these words. He remembered that time well, how overwhelmed Diana had seemed during their engagement period. He had attributed her nervousness to normal pre-wedding jitters, never fully understanding the depth of her anxiety. At 32, he had been so much older, so established in his role, while she was still finding her way in the world. The entries continued through their honeymoon, revealing Diana's genuine attempts to understand her new husband and his world. She wrote about their time on the royal yacht Britannia, describing moments of tenderness that Charles had almost forgotten. Charles showed me his watercolor sketches today. He's actually quite talented, though he seems embarrassed about his artistic side. When he's painting, his whole demeanor changes. He becomes softer, more vulnerable. I wish he would let people see this side of him more often. There's so much depth to him that the public never gets to see. These words hit Charles particularly hard because they showed Diana's early attempts to understand and appreciate him. She had seen qualities in him that he had always felt self-conscious about. His love for art, literature, and environmental causes had often been dismissed by critics as eccentric or out of touch, but Diana had recognized their value from the beginning. As he continued reading, Charles found entries from their early years of marriage, when both of them were still hopeful about their future together. Diana wrote about their quiet moments at Highgrove, their country estate, where they had tried to build a normal family life away from the public eye. We had dinner alone tonight, just the 2 of us. Charles told me about his plans for the organic gardens at Highgrove. His eyes light up when he talks about sustainable farming and environmental conservation. I don't always understand all the technical aspects, but I love seeing him passionate about something. He has such big dreams for making the world better. Sometimes I think he cares more about the planet than people realize. Charles had to pause his reading as memories of those early days came flooding back. He remembered those intimate dinners, the conversations they had shared about his vision for a more sustainable future. Diana had been a good listener, even when the topics weren't particularly interesting to her. She had tried to support his causes, even if she didn't always understand them completely. But, as he read further, the entries began to reveal the cracks that would eventually destroy their marriage. Diana wrote about feeling isolated within the royal system, struggling to find her place and purpose. I attended another charity function today, but I felt like I was just going through the motions. Everyone expects me to smile and wave, but I want to do something that actually matters. I see all these people suffering, and I want to help them in a real way, not just pose for photographs. Charles says I need to be patient. That change takes time in the monarchy, but I don't know if I can wait that long. This entry was particularly painful for Charles because it highlighted one of the fundamental differences between them. He had been raised to understand that royal change happened slowly, through decades of careful, measured steps. Diana, with her youth and passion, had wanted to make an immediate impact. She had chafed against the constraints of royal protocol, while he had accepted them as necessary structures. The diary revealed Diana's growing frustration with their different approaches to royal duty. She wrote about feeling misunderstood and constrained by traditions that seemed meaningless to her. I tried to talk to Charles about visiting the AIDS patients at the hospital, but he seemed worried about the controversy it might cause. I don't understand why showing compassion should be controversial. These people are suffering, and they need to know that someone cares about them. Sometimes I feel like the institution is more important to him than actual human beings. Charles winced as he read this entry, remembering the heated discussions they had about her AIDS activism. At the time, he had been concerned about the potential political implications of her involvement with such a controversial issue. Public opinion about AIDS was still largely shaped by fear and prejudice, and he had worried about the damage it might do to the monarchy's reputation. Now, reading Diana's words with the wisdom of hindsight, he realized how wrong he had been. Her compassionate approach to AIDS patients had indeed been revolutionary, helping to change public attitudes and reduce stigma. She had been ahead of her time, seeing the human side of issues where he had only seen potential problems. The entries from the mid-1980s showed Diana's increasing confidence in her public role, even as her private marriage began to deteriorate. She wrote about her growing understanding of her power to influence public opinion and create positive change. The response to my hospital visit yesterday was incredible. The patients seemed so happy to see someone who wasn't afraid to touch them, to treat them like human beings rather than pariahs. One young man told me that my visit gave him hope. I realized then that this is my calling. I may not understand all the political complexities that Charles deals with, but I can connect with people in pain. I can use my position to bring attention to forgotten causes. Charles felt a complex mixture of pride and regret as he read about Diana's growing confidence. He was proud of the woman she had become, of her ability to touch people's hearts and create meaningful change. But he also felt deep regret about his failure to support her more effectively during this period of growth. The diary entries revealed how their different temperaments and approaches to royal life had created an increasingly wide gulf between them. While Charles focused on long-term constitutional responsibilities and environmental causes, Diana was drawn to immediate human suffering and emotional connection. Charles came home late again tonight. He said he was in meetings about the prince's trust, but sometimes I wonder if he's avoiding spending time with me. We seem to live in parallel worlds now, even when we're in the same house. He's always thinking about duty and responsibility, while I'm thinking about the people we could help if we just tried harder to connect with them. Reading these words, Charles realized how lonely Diana must have felt during those years. While he had been pursuing his royal duties with characteristic dedication, she had been struggling with isolation and a sense of purposelessness. He had failed to recognize that her need for emotional connection wasn't a weakness, but a strength that could have enhanced both their marriage and their royal work. The entries from the late 1980s showed Diana's growing independence and her determination to forge her own path within the royal family. She wrote about her evolving relationship with the media and her understanding of how to use publicity for positive purposes. The photographers follow me everywhere, but I'm learning to use their attention for good. When I visit the homeless shelter or the children's hospital, I make sure they get pictures that tell a story. If my presence can bring attention to these causes, then maybe all this scrutiny is worth something. Charles was struck by Diana's sophisticated understanding of media relations, something that had taken him much longer to develop. She had intuitively grasped how to transform what could have been intrusive coverage into a force for positive change. Her ability to connect emotionally with both her subjects and the viewing public had been remarkable. But the diary also revealed the personal cost of this public success. Diana wrote about the pressure of maintaining a perfect image while dealing with private struggles. Everyone expects me to be the perfect princess, always smiling, always graceful. But Some days I feel like I'm falling apart inside. I love William and Harry so much, and I want to be strong for them. But this life is so much harder than I ever imagined. Sometimes I wonder if I'm cut out for this, or if I'm just disappointing everyone by not being what they need me to be. These words broke Charles's heart because they revealed the vulnerable young woman behind the public persona. Diana had been trying so hard to fulfill everyone's expectations while struggling with her own doubts and fears. He wished now that he had been more supportive, more understanding of the pressure she was facing. As the evening wore on, Charles found himself completely absorbed in Diana's words, gaining new insights into the woman he had been married to for 15 years but had never fully understood. The diary was revealing sides of Diana that she had never shared with him directly, thoughts and feelings she had kept hidden during their troubled relationship. One entry particularly stood out, written during a difficult period in their marriage when both of them were struggling with their roles and their relationship. I had a long conversation with Charles today about our future. He's trying so hard to make things work, but we're such different people. He needs order and tradition, while I need spontaneity and emotional connection. I don't think either of us is wrong. We're just incompatible in ways that matter. I wish we could have been friends instead of trying to be husband and wife. Maybe then, we could have appreciated each other's strengths instead of focusing on our differences. This observation showed a maturity and understanding that Charles hadn't recognized in Diana at the time. She had seen their fundamental incompatibility clearly, even while both of them were still fighting to save their marriage. Her suggestion that they might have been better as friends rather than spouses was particularly poignant, suggesting a path they had never been able to explore. The rain continued to fall outside as Charles read through the night, discovering layer after layer of the complex woman Diana had been. The diary painted a picture of someone who was simultaneously strong and vulnerable, confident and insecure, determined and uncertain. She had been trying to navigate an impossible situation with grace and dignity while dealing with very real human emotions and needs. As dawn began to break over London, Charles closed the diary temporarily, overwhelmed by the emotional intensity of Diana's words. He realized that this discovery was going to change everything he thought he knew about their relationship, about Diana herself, and about the choices both of them had made during their years together. The diary still had many more entries to reveal, stories, and insights that would continue to challenge his understanding of their shared history. But, already, Charles felt a profound shift in his perspective. The woman whose words he had been reading all night was not the Diana he remembered from their troubled marriage, but a more complete, more nuanced person who had been struggling with challenges he had never fully appreciated. He looked out at the breaking dawn and wondered what other revelations awaited him in the remaining pages of Diana's diary. Whatever they contained, he knew that this night of reading had already begun to heal wounds he didn't even realize were still bleeding, and to answer questions that had haunted him for over 2 decades. The journey through Diana's most private thoughts was far from over, but already Charles felt a deeper understanding of the remarkable woman who had shared his life and given him 2 sons who meant everything to him. The diary was proving to be not just a window into the past, but a bridge toward a more complete understanding of one of the most important relationships of his life. The morning light filtered through the heavy curtains as Charles returned to Diana's diary after a brief rest. His coffee had grown cold beside him, forgotten in his absorption with the intimate revelations contained within those yellowed pages. The second section of the diary covered the period when Diana was finding her voice as a public figure while their marriage continued its painful decline. The entries from 1989 showed Diana's growing confidence in her humanitarian work, particularly her involvement with landmine campaigns and children's charities. Her writing revealed a woman who was discovering her own power and influence, even as her personal life remained turbulent. Today I held a little boy who had lost his leg to a landmine. He couldn't have been more than 6 years old, but his smile lit up the entire hospital ward. This is why I do what I do. When I see children suffering because of adult conflicts, I know I have to use whatever influence I have to help them. Charles thinks my approach is too emotional, too direct, but sometimes emotion is exactly what's needed to wake people up. Charles felt a stab of recognition as he read these words. He remembered the conversations they had about her humanitarian work, how he had often cautioned her about becoming too personally involved in political issues. At the time, he had thought he was protecting both her and the monarchy from potential controversy. Now he could see how his well-intentioned advice might have felt like criticism or lack of support. The diary revealed Diana's frustration with the constraints of royal protocol, particularly when those constraints prevented her from helping people in need. She wrote about a visit to a homeless shelter that had been canceled due to security concerns. They canceled my visit to the shelter because they said it was too dangerous, too unpredictable. But how can we claim to serve the people if we're afraid to go where the people are? The homeless don't pose a threat to me. They need help and compassion. Sometimes I think the palace staff cares more about avoiding bad publicity than actually doing good work. These words highlighted one of the fundamental tensions in Diana's royal role. She wanted to be accessible and hands-on in her charitable work, while the royal protection officers and palace officials were primarily concerned with her safety and the maintenance of royal dignity. Charles had usually sided with the officials, seeing their caution as necessary prudence. But Diana's diary showed him how those decisions must have felt like barriers preventing her from fulfilling her true calling. As he continued reading, Charles found entries that revealed Diana's deep love for their sons, William and Harry, and her concerns about raising them within the royal system. Her maternal instincts often clashed with royal tradition, creating another source of tension in their marriage. William asked me today why he can't go to school like other children. How do I explain to a 7-year-old that his birth makes him different, that he carries responsibilities he didn't choose? I want him and Harry to have as normal a childhood as possible, but Charles insists on maintaining certain traditions. I understand his position, but these are our children, not just future kings and princes. This entry touched on one of their most significant disagreements during their marriage. Diana had been determined to give William and Harry experiences outside the traditional royal bubble, while Charles had been more concerned with preparing them for their future roles. Both approaches had merit, but their inability to find a middle ground had created constant friction. The diary entries from the early 1990s showed Diana's growing isolation within the royal family, even as her public popularity continued to soar. She wrote about feeling misunderstood and unsupported by the very institution she was trying to serve. I attended the family gathering at Balmoral this weekend, but I felt like an outsider looking in. They all speak the same language, understand the same unwritten rules, while I'm still trying to figure out what's expected of me. The Queen is kind but distant, and Charles seems more comfortable with his family than he ever is with me. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever truly belong here. Charles felt a deep pang of regret as he read about Diana's sense of isolation. The royal family's reserved nature, which he had grown up with and accepted as normal, must have felt cold and unwelcoming to someone with Diana's warm, expressive personality. He wished he had done more to bridge that gap, to help his family understand Diana's different communication style and emotional needs. The diary revealed Diana's growing awareness of Charles's relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles, though her early entries showed more hurt confusion than anger. She wrote about feeling like there was a third person in their marriage long before the situation became public knowledge. Charles mentioned Camilla again today in a way that made me uncomfortable. There's a familiarity in how he talks about her, a warmth that I rarely see when he speaks to me. I try to tell myself I'm being paranoid, but a woman knows when she's competing for her husband's attention. I just don't understand why I'm losing a competition I never knew I was in. Reading these words, Charles felt overwhelming guilt and regret. He could see now how his inability to fully let go of his past relationship with Camilla had poisoned his marriage with Diana from the beginning. Diana's intuition about the situation had been accurate, but her youth and inexperience had left her unable to address the problem directly. He had been unfair to both women by not resolving his feelings before marrying Diana. The diary entries show Diana's attempts to understand and forgive Charles's emotional attachment to Camilla, revealing a generosity of spirit that Charles had not fully appreciated at the time. I tried to imagine how I would feel if Charles had a close friendship with another woman that predated our marriage. Maybe Camilla represents a time in his life when he felt more himself, less burdened by expectations. I can understand that need for someone who knew you before you became a public figure. But it still hurts to feel like I'm competing with a memory, or worse, a continuing connection. This entry showed remarkable emotional maturity from someone who had been barely 20 when she married. Diana was trying to understand Charles's perspective while dealing with her own pain and insecurity. Her willingness to empathize with his position, even while feeling hurt by it, demonstrated a depth of character that Charles was only now beginning to fully appreciate. As Diana's public profile continued to grow, the diary revealed her increasing confidence in using her platform for causes she believed in. She wrote about her famous handshake with AIDS patients, which had helped change public perception about the disease. The palace advisors were terrified about my visit to the AIDS ward, warning me about potential backlash and political complications. But when I saw the fear and isolation in those patients' eyes, I knew I had to do something. When I shook hands with them without gloves, I could see the relief and gratitude on their faces. Sometimes breaking protocol is exactly what's needed to show our common humanity. Charles felt immense pride reading about Diana's courage in this moment, even as he remembered his own anxiety about the potential consequences. Her instinct to lead with compassion rather than caution had indeed changed public attitudes and saved countless lives. She had been braver than him in that moment, and more right about what was needed. The diary entries from the mid-1990s revealed Diana's growing independence and her determination to create her own role within or outside the royal family. She wrote about her evolving relationship with the media and her understanding of her unique position in British society. I'm beginning to understand that my relationship with the public is something unprecedented in royal history. People see me as more than just a princess. They see me as someone who understands their struggles and genuinely cares about their problems. This connection gives me power, but it also brings responsibility. I need to use this influence wisely. This entry showed Diana's sophisticated understanding of her own position and influence. She had recognized that her connection with the public was different from traditional royal relationships, based more on emotional resonance than hierarchical respect. Charles could see now how this insight had informed her later humanitarian work and her decision to maintain her public profile after their divorce. The diary revealed Diana's internal struggle with the decision to separate from Charles, showing that it was not made lightly or without considerable anguish. I've been thinking about what's best for everyone: Charles, me, the boys, even the monarchy itself. We're making each other miserable, and that can't be good for William and Harry to witness. Maybe if we separate, we can both find ways to be happier and more effective in our roles. Charles might be more relaxed without feeling like he's constantly disappointing me, and I might be able to pursue my work without always having to justify my approach. This entry revealed Diana's thoughtful consideration of their separation, her concern for everyone involved rather than just her own happiness. She had recognized that their incompatibility was hurting not just them but their children and their ability to serve effectively. Her willingness to consider Charles's well-being even while their marriage was failing showed remarkable generosity. Throughout the entries covering their separation period, Diana wrote about the challenges of co-parenting while living apart, and her determination to shield William and Harry from the worst aspects of their parents' difficulties. William is starting to ask more questions about why his father and I don't live together anymore. I try to explain it in terms he can understand, that sometimes adults need to live separately to be better parents and better people. But I can see the confusion in his eyes. I never wanted my children to grow up in a broken home, but maybe a peaceful broken home is better than a conflict-filled, intact one. Charles was moved by Diana's obvious pain about the impact of their separation on their sons. Her primary concern throughout the process had been minimizing harm to William and Harry, even when she was dealing with her own emotional turmoil. He could see now how much she had sacrificed to try to make the situation as stable as possible for their children. The diary entries revealed Diana's complicated relationship with her newfound freedom after the separation. While she appreciated the ability to pursue her own interests and causes, she also struggled with loneliness and uncertainty about her future. It's strange to be making decisions entirely for myself after years of having every choice scrutinized by advisors and protocol officers. I can visit whichever charities I choose, speak more freely about issues I care about, even wear whatever I want without worrying about sending the wrong message. But sometimes the freedom feels overwhelming. I was so young when I married Charles that I never really learned to be independent. Now I'm having to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to be the perfect princess. This entry highlighted one of the most poignant aspects of Diana's situation. She had entered royal life as a teenager and had spent her entire adult life defined by her relationship to Charles and the royal family. Creating an independent identity at 30-something while raising two children and maintaining her public responsibilities was an enormous challenge. Charles found entries that showed Diana's growing interest in international humanitarian causes, particularly her work with landmine victims. Her writing revealed both her passion for the cause and her awareness of the political sensitivities involved. The Foreign Office is concerned about my landmine campaign because they say it could interfere with government policy. But how can helping victims of war be political? When I see children who will never walk normally again because of weapons that continue to kill and maim long after conflicts end, I don't care about diplomatic complications. Some issues are bigger than politics. Reading about Diana's landmine work, Charles felt a complex mixture of admiration and regret. Her willingness to tackle controversial international issues had indeed been problematic for the government at times, but her moral clarity and emotional intelligence had ultimately helped achieve positive change. She had been right to trust her instincts about the importance of the cause, even when it created diplomatic difficulties. The diary revealed Diana's thoughts about her future and her hopes for her son's upbringing. Despite the pain of her failed marriage, she maintained optimism about her ability to contribute positively to the world. I want William and Harry to understand that being born into privilege comes with responsibilities, but also with incredible opportunities to help others. If my experiences, both good and bad, can teach them to lead with compassion and courage, then maybe all of this struggle will have been worthwhile. They don't have to repeat the mistakes Charles and I made. This entry showed Diana's remarkable ability to find meaning and purpose even in her most difficult experiences. Rather than becoming bitter about her failed marriage, she was determined to use those experiences to help her sons become better men and more effective leaders. As Charles read through Diana's thoughts about their relationship and its aftermath, he was struck by her continued respect and even affection for him despite their incompatibility as marriage partners. Charles is a good man who was trying to do his duty as he understood it. I think we both married the idea of each other rather than the reality. He needed someone who could seamlessly fit into the royal role, while I needed someone who could help me navigate that world with patience and understanding. We were both disappointed, but that doesn't make either of us wrong. Maybe someday we can be friends again. These words brought tears to Charles's eyes because they showed Diana's generous spirit and her mature understanding of their relationship's complexities. Even while dealing with the pain of their failed marriage, she had been able to see his perspective and maintain compassion for his struggles. The entries from Diana's final years revealed a woman who had found her voice and was using it to advocate for causes close to her heart. She wrote about her work with AIDS patients, homeless people, and landmine victims with passion and determination. I've realized that my real calling is to be a voice for people who often don't have one. The homeless man sleeping rough in London and the landmine victim in Angola both deserve dignity and help. My position gives me access to world leaders and media attention that can actually change policies and save lives. This is how I want to use whatever influence I have. Reading these final entries, Charles could see how Diana had evolved from an uncertain young bride into a confident humanitarian leader. She had found ways to use her unique position to create meaningful change while remaining true to her compassionate nature. Her death had cut short what could have been decades of continued positive impact. As he finished reading this section of the diary, Charles felt overwhelmed by the complexity of Diana's inner life and the depth of her struggles and triumphs. The woman revealed in these pages was more thoughtful, more generous, and more self-aware than he had realized during their marriage. The diary was forcing him to reconsider not just their relationship, but his own role in its failure and his understanding of Diana's character. Tomorrow he would continue reading, knowing that each page brought new insights and deeper understanding of the remarkable woman who had shared 15 years of his life and given him 2 sons he loved more than anything. The morning sun was now fully streaming through his study windows, but Charles felt as though he was seeing the world with new eyes, illuminated by Diana's words and the painful honesty of her private thoughts. Charles spent the afternoon walking through the gardens of Clarence House, trying to process the emotional weight of Diana's diary entries. The crisp December air helped clear his mind, but he found himself constantly returning to her words, seeing their shared history through entirely new eyes. When evening came, he settled back into his study, ready to continue this painful but necessary journey through Diana's most private thoughts. The next section of the diary covered a particularly turbulent period in both their lives, when their separation had become public knowledge and Diana was establishing herself as an independent figure on the world stage. Her entries revealed the internal struggles of a woman trying to balance motherhood, public responsibility, and personal healing. The photographers were waiting outside the school again today when I dropped off William and Harry. I hate that my children can't have normal experiences because of the media attention surrounding our family situation. But when I see how the boys handle it all with such grace and maturity, I'm reminded that they're stronger than I sometimes give them credit for. They're learning to navigate this complicated world in their own way. Charles felt a familiar ache as he read about Diana's concerns for their son's privacy and normalcy. This had been one of the few areas where they had remained united, both wanting to protect William and Harry from the worst aspects of media scrutiny. Diana's fierce protectiveness of the boys had been one of her most admirable qualities, and Charles had always respected her instincts about their upbringing, even when they disagreed on other matters. The diary revealed Diana's growing confidence in her ability to use media attention constructively rather than simply being a victim of it. She had learned to turn the spotlight that followed her everywhere into a powerful tool for raising awareness about important causes. I've started to see the photographers and journalists differently. They're going to follow me regardless of what I do, so I might as well make sure they're documenting something meaningful. When I visit the hospital ward for HIV patients or meet with families affected by landmines, those images can do more good than any formal royal portrait ever could. I'm learning to work with the media rather than against it. This entry showed Diana's sophisticated understanding of how to leverage her unique position for positive change. Charles had always been more wary of media manipulation, preferring the traditional royal approach of limited, controlled engagement with the press. But Diana's diary showed him how her more open approach had indeed created opportunities for meaningful advocacy that wouldn't have existed otherwise. The entries from this period also revealed Diana's ongoing struggle with depression and eating disorders, issues that Charles now realized he had never fully understood or known how to address during their marriage. Some days the sadness feels overwhelming, like a weight pressing down on my chest that makes it hard to breathe. I know I should talk to someone about these feelings, but I'm afraid of what people will think if they know the Princess of Wales struggles with such basic things as eating and sleeping. I put on my public face and do my duties, but inside I'm often falling apart. Reading these words, Charles felt a profound sense of failure and regret. During their marriage, he had interpreted Diana's emotional struggles as drama or attention-seeking behavior, not understanding that she was dealing with genuine mental health challenges. His upbringing in the emotionally reserved royal household had not equipped him to recognize or respond appropriately to Diana's psychological needs. The diary showed how isolated Diana had felt during her darkest periods, unable to seek help because of the stigma attached to mental illness and her fear of appearing weak or unstable. I tried to talk to Charles about how I've been feeling, but I could see the discomfort in his eyes. Mental illness isn't something his family discusses openly. They believe in keeping a stiff upper lip and carrying on regardless of personal struggles. But sometimes carrying on feels impossible, and I need someone to understand that admitting vulnerability isn't the same as being weak. This entry was particularly painful for Charles because it showed how his family's traditional approach to emotional difficulties had failed Diana when she needed support most. The royal family's emphasis on duty and stoicism, which had sustained them through many crises, had become a barrier to understanding and helping Diana with her very real psychological struggles. As he continued reading, Charles found entries that revealed Diana's thoughts about her growing relationship with Dodi Fayed and her hopes for finding personal happiness after their divorce. I'm starting to feel like myself again, not just someone's wife or someone's mother, but Diana. Dodi makes me laugh in a way I haven't in years. He doesn't treat me like a porcelain doll or worry constantly about protocol and proper behavior. When I'm with him, I can just be a woman enjoying life, not a princess carrying the weight of everyone's expectations. Charles felt a complex mixture of emotions reading about Diana's relationship with Dodi. There was sadness for the happiness that had eluded them in their own marriage, but also genuine pleasure that Diana had found someone who appreciated her spontaneous, fun-loving nature. He could see now how his own serious, duty-bound personality had stifled the joyful aspects of Diana's character. The diary entries revealed Diana's thoughts about the possibility of remarrying and how that might affect her sons and her public role. People keep asking if I would consider marrying again, and honestly, I don't know. After everything that happened with Charles, I'm not sure I trust my judgment about relationships. But I do know that I don't want to be alone forever. William and Harry deserve to see their mother happy, not just dutiful. Maybe there's a way to find love again while still being the mother and public figure I want to be. This entry showed Diana's thoughtful approach to her personal life, Her consideration of how her choices would affect not just her own happiness, but her children's well-being and her public effectiveness. Even when contemplating personal fulfillment, she was thinking about her broader responsibilities and relationships. The diary revealed Diana's continuing evolution as a humanitarian leader, particularly her work with international causes that brought her into contact with global leaders and policymakers. I met with officials from the Red Cross today to discuss expanding the landmine campaign. They were surprised by how much I know about the technical and political aspects of the issue. I think they expected me to be just a pretty face for their cause, but I've done my homework. If I'm going to lend my name and influence to something, I want to understand it completely and contribute meaningfully to the solution. Charles was impressed by Diana's dedication to educating herself about complex international issues. Her natural empathy and emotional intelligence, combined with serious study and preparation, had made her a genuinely effective advocate for important causes. He realized that her approach to humanitarian work had been more sophisticated than he had given her credit for during their marriage. The entries showed Diana's growing awareness of her own mortality and her desire to ensure her legacy would continue through her sons and her charitable work. I've been thinking about what I want to leave behind if something happens to me. Obviously, my first priority is raising William and Harry to be good men who use their privileges responsibly. But I also want my humanitarian work to continue, to show people that royalty can be about service and compassion, not just ceremony and tradition. I want to prove that you can use your position to make real change in the world. This entry was particularly poignant given Diana's tragic death just months later. Her prescient concern about her legacy showed remarkable maturity and self-awareness. She had understood that her true impact would be measured not by royal duties performed, but by lives changed and causes advanced. The diary revealed Diana's complicated relationship with the royal family after her divorce, showing both her continued respect for the institution and her frustration with its limitations. I had tea with the Queen today, and she was actually quite warm and supportive. I think she understands that Charles and I were simply incompatible, and that doesn't make either of us bad people. But I can also see her concern about my independence and how my actions might affect the monarchy's reputation. We exist in different worlds now, but there's still mutual respect. This entry showed Diana's nuanced understanding of her post-divorce relationship with the royal family. She had not become bitter or vindictive after the marriage ended, but had tried to maintain constructive relationships while asserting her independence. Charles was grateful to read about her continued respect for his mother and her understanding of the Queen's difficult position. The diary entries from Diana's final months revealed a woman who had found peace with her past and was optimistic about her future, despite the ongoing challenges in her life. I'm finally at a place where I can think about Charles without anger or sadness. We were two people trying to do our best in an impossible situation. He wasn't the husband I needed, and I wasn't the wife he needed, but we created two wonderful sons together, and we both contributed to causes we believed in. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's actually quite a lot. Reading these words, Charles felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. Diana's forgiveness and understanding, expressed in the privacy of her diary, meant more to him than any public reconciliation could have. Her ability to find peace with their failed marriage while maintaining respect for both of them showed the emotional growth she had achieved in her final years. The diary revealed Diana's hopes for her sons' futures and her determination to prepare them for their unique responsibilities. I want William to understand that being king someday doesn't mean he has to become someone else. He can honor tradition while still being true to his own character and values. And I want Harry to know that even though he won't inherit the throne, he has important work to do in the world. Both of them have such good hearts. I just want to help them use those hearts wisely. This entry showed Diana's sophisticated understanding of her son's different paths and challenges. She had recognized that William would need to balance personal authenticity with royal responsibility, while Harry would need to find meaningful purpose outside the direct line of succession. Her insights about their personalities and needs had been remarkably accurate. As Charles read Diana's thoughts about co-parenting after their divorce, he was struck by her generosity and wisdom in handling their complicated family dynamic. Charles and I had a good conversation about the boys' education today. Despite everything that went wrong between us, we both want the same things for William and Harry. We want them to be confident, compassionate, and prepared for whatever life brings them. When we focus on that shared goal, we can work together effectively. Maybe this is how we were always meant to be, as co-parents rather than as husband and wife. This observation was both insightful and painful for Charles. Diana had recognized that they functioned better as divorced co-parents than they ever had as married partners. Their shared love for their sons had provided a foundation for cooperation that their romantic relationship had never achieved. The diary entries revealed Diana's thoughts about her public image and her desire to be remembered for her humanitarian work rather than her personal struggles. I know the newspapers will always be interested in my personal life, but I hope that eventually people will remember me for the causes I supported rather than the drama of my marriage and divorce. I want to be known as someone who used her position to help people who were suffering, who showed that compassion can be more powerful than protocol. This entry showed Diana's clear understanding of how she wanted to be remembered and her active efforts to shape her legacy. Charles could see now how intentional her humanitarian work had been, not just following her natural instincts, but consciously building a meaningful contribution to the world. The final entries in this section of the diary revealed Diana's growing sense of personal empowerment and her excitement about the possibilities ahead of her. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm in control of my own life. I can choose which causes to support, which events to attend, even which countries to visit. The work I'm doing with landmine victims is making a real difference, and I can see how much more I could accomplish in the years ahead. I'm finally understanding how powerful my position can be when I use it wisely. Reading about Diana's optimism and sense of purpose in her final months, Charles felt both joy for her personal growth and profound sadness for all the work she would never be able to complete. She had been just beginning to realize her full potential as a humanitarian leader when her life was cut short. The diary also contained reflections on her relationship with the media and her growing skill at managing public attention for positive purposes. I've learned that the key to dealing with press attention is to stay focused on what really matters. If I'm visiting a hospital or attending a charity function, I keep my attention on the people I'm there to help, not on the cameras following me around. When my focus is genuine, the coverage usually reflects that authenticity. This insight showed Diana's sophisticated understanding of media relations and her ability to maintain her humanity despite constant scrutiny. Charles had always struggled more with the intrusive nature of press attention, but Diana had found ways to turn that attention into a force for good. As Charles finished this section of the diary, he felt overwhelmed by the complexity of Diana's character and the tragedy of her early death. The woman revealed in these pages was someone who had overcome enormous challenges to become a powerful force for positive change in the world. Her ability to transform personal pain into compassionate action, to find purpose in suffering, and to maintain optimism despite enormous pressures was truly remarkable. Charles realized that he was not just reading the diary of his former wife, but the private thoughts of one of the most influential humanitarian figures of the modern era. The next section of the diary would cover Diana's final weeks, but Charles needed time to process what he had already read. The emotional journey through Diana's private thoughts was changing his understanding not just of their relationship, but of her character, her contributions, and her lasting impact on both their family and the world. As night fell over London, Charles sat in the quiet of his study, surrounded by the echoes of Diana's voice and the weight of 26 years of hindsight. The diary was proving to be not just a record of one woman's struggles and triumphs, but a testament to the power of resilience, compassion, and the determination to use one's position for good. Tomorrow he would read about Diana's final days, but tonight he simply sat with the profound respect and admiration her words had rekindled in his heart. The fourth day of reading Diana's diary found Charles in an even more contemplative mood. The previous sections had already transformed his understanding of their relationship and Diana's character, but he sensed that the most emotionally challenging entries lay ahead. This section covered the final months of Diana's life, a period when she was at the height of her influence and personal happiness, making her tragic death even more poignant. Charles approached these final entries with a mixture of anticipation and dread, knowing that Diana's own words would provide the most intimate perspective on the last chapter of her remarkable life. The entries from early 1997 showed Diana at her most confident and purposeful, having found her voice as an international humanitarian leader while also discovering personal happiness in her relationship with Dodi Fayed. I feel like I'm finally living authentically for the first time in years. The work I'm doing with the landmine campaign is gaining real momentum, and governments are starting to take notice. But more importantly, I'm happy. Actually happy, not just putting on a brave face for the cameras. Dodie makes me feel cherished and protected in a way I haven't experienced since I was a teenager. Reading about Diana's happiness, Charles felt a complex mixture of emotions. He was genuinely glad that she had found joy and fulfillment, but he also felt regret that he had never been able to provide those feelings for her during their marriage. Her words highlighted how constrained and unhappy she must have felt during their years together. The diary revealed Diana's thoughts about integrating her personal happiness with her public responsibilities, showing her careful consideration of how her choices might affect her sons and her humanitarian work. I know there's speculation about my relationship with Dodie, and I understand why people are curious. But I'm determined not to let my personal life overshadow the important work I'm doing. If anything, being genuinely happy makes me more effective in my public role. When you feel loved and supported, it's easier to extend that love and support to others. This entry demonstrated Diana's mature understanding of the relationship between personal fulfillment and professional effectiveness. She had learned to see her own happiness not as selfish indulgence, but as something that enhanced her ability to help others. This was a profound insight that Charles wished he had understood earlier in his own life. The diary entries showed Diana's excitement about upcoming projects and her growing influence in international affairs. She wrote about her plans to expand her humanitarian work and her hopes for continued impact. I've been invited to speak at several international conferences about landmine removal and victim assistance. It's incredible to think that my voice now carries weight in diplomatic circles. A few years ago, I was just trying to survive each day and fulfill basic royal duties. Now I'm helping to shape international policy on humanitarian issues. Sometimes I can hardly believe how much has changed. Charles was struck by Diana's wonder at her own transformation and influence. She had evolved from an uncertain young woman struggling with her royal role into a confident international figure whose opinions were sought by world leaders. Her journey of personal and professional growth was truly remarkable. The diary revealed Diana's deep satisfaction with her hands-on approach to humanitarian work, particularly her direct engagement with victims of war and poverty. Today I held a little girl in Bosnia who had lost both her parents to ethnic violence. She couldn't speak English, and I couldn't speak her language, but when I held her, I could feel some of her fear ease away. This is why I do what I do. Sometimes healing doesn't require words, just human connection and the willingness to acknowledge someone's pain. These entries showed Diana's intuitive understanding of the power of presence and human touch in healing trauma. Her approach to humanitarian work was distinctly personal and emotional, focusing on individual connections rather than just institutional change. This had been one of her greatest strengths as a public figure. The diary also contained Diana's reflections on her relationship with her sons during this period, showing her pride in their development and her hopes for their futures. William is becoming such a thoughtful young man. Yesterday, he asked me about homelessness and why some people don't have houses to live in. I love that he's starting to think about social issues and want to understand the world beyond royal privilege. Harry is different, but equally wonderful, with such a warm heart and natural ability to make people smile. They're both going to do amazing things with their lives. Reading about Diana's pride in William and Harry, Charles felt grateful for the foundation she had provided their sons. Her emphasis on compassion, social awareness, and genuine engagement with people had clearly influenced both boys' approaches to their royal duties and their characters as young men. The entries from the summer of 1997 revealed Diana's excitement about her future and her sense that she was entering the most productive phase of her life. I feel like everything I've experienced, all the struggles and pain and growth, has been preparing me for this moment. I know who I am now, what I care about, and how to use my position effectively. The humanitarian work gives me purpose, my relationship with Dodie brings me joy, and the boys are thriving. For the first time in my adult life, I can honestly say I'm content. This entry was particularly heartbreaking for Charles to read, knowing that Diana's life would end just weeks later. She had finally achieved the balance and fulfillment that had eluded her for so many years, only to have it tragically cut short. The diary revealed Diana's thoughts about her legacy and her hopes for how she would be remembered. I want people to remember that it's possible to use privilege and position to make a real difference in the world. I want young women to know that they don't have to choose between being strong and being compassionate, between having a career and having relationships. I want my sons to remember that their mother fought for people who couldn't fight for themselves. These words show Diana's clear vision of her legacy and her understanding of the impact she had already achieved. She wanted to be remembered not just as a royal figure, but as someone who had used her unique position to advocate for the vulnerable and marginalized. The diary contained Diana's reflections on her relationship with the British people and her understanding of her unique connection with the public. The response to my humanitarian work has been overwhelming. People write to me from all over the world, sharing their own stories of loss and struggle, thanking me for bringing attention to causes they care about. I think people respond to me because they sense that I understand pain and loss personally. I'm not just a privileged person doing charity work. I'm someone who has experienced real suffering and found ways to transform it into something positive. This insight revealed Diana's sophisticated understanding of why she had connected so powerfully with people around the world. Her ability to transform personal pain into public compassion had indeed been one of her most remarkable qualities and the source of much of her influence. The diary entries showed Diana's continued efforts to maintain positive relationships with the royal family despite their divorce, particularly for the sake of their sons. I had lunch with Charles today to discuss the boys' upcoming school holidays. It was pleasant and civilized, and I could see glimpses of the man I first fell in love with all those years ago. We may not have been right for each other as husband and wife, but I'm grateful that we can be effective co-parents. William and Harry need to see that their parents respect each other, even if we couldn't make our marriage work. Charles was deeply moved by Diana's continued kindness and her commitment to maintaining family harmony. Despite all the pain and disappointment they had caused each other, she had chosen forgiveness and cooperation for the sake of their children. This spoke volumes about her character and her priorities. The diary revealed Diana's thoughts about the intense media attention that followed her everywhere, and her strategies for managing it while protecting her privacy and sanity. The photographers are relentless, but I'm learning to live with constant scrutiny. The key is to stay focused on what matters and not let their presence change how I behave. When I'm doing meaningful work, I can almost forget they're there. But I do worry about how this level of attention affects the people I'm trying to help. Sometimes I think my presence draws more focus to the media circus than to the actual issues. This entry showed Diana's ongoing struggle with the double-edged nature of her fame. While her celebrity status helped bring attention to important causes, it also created complications and distractions that sometimes undermined her humanitarian work. The final entries from July 1997 revealed Diana's excitement about her upcoming vacation with Dodi and her plans for expanded humanitarian work in the fall. I'm looking forward to a few weeks of relaxation and privacy with Dodi. It will be wonderful to just be ourselves without cameras and crowds and official obligations. When I return, I want to expand my work with landmine victims and maybe take on some new causes. I feel like I have so much energy and enthusiasm for making a difference in the world. Reading about Diana's plans and optimism, Charles felt overwhelmed by the tragedy of her death. She had been looking forward to years of continued growth and contribution, both personally and professionally. The world had lost not just a beloved figure, but a dynamic force for positive change who was just reaching her full potential. The diary contained Diana's final reflections on her journey from shy teenager to international icon, showing her amazement at her own transformation. Sometimes I look back at the girl who married Charles in 1981, and I can hardly recognize her. She was so young and uncertain, so eager to please, and so afraid of making mistakes. I've learned that making mistakes isn't the worst thing that can happen to you. Living in fear of making them is. I'm proud of the woman I've become, of the courage I've found to speak up for what I believe in. These words revealed Diana's hard-won wisdom and self-acceptance. She had indeed transformed herself from an uncertain young bride into a confident, influential woman who used her platform courageously and effectively. Her personal growth had been remarkable to witness. The diary's final entries contained Diana's thoughts about love, both the love she felt for her sons and the new romantic love she had found with Dodi. I never thought I could love someone again the way I loved Dodi. After everything that happened with Charles, I had almost convinced myself that lasting romantic love wasn't possible for me. But Dodi has shown me that I'm capable of trusting and being vulnerable again. Whether or not this relationship leads to marriage, I'm grateful to know that my heart can still open completely to another person. Charles felt both joy and sadness reading about Diana's rediscovered capacity for love. He was happy that she had found someone who appreciated and cherished her, but he also felt deep regret that he had not been able to be that person for her during their marriage. The very last entry in the diary was dated just days before Diana's trip to Paris, the journey that would end in tragedy. I feel incredibly blessed by my life right now. I have two wonderful sons who make me proud every day, meaningful work that allows me to make a real difference in the world, and a relationship that brings me joy and companionship. I know I've faced challenges and made mistakes, but I've also learned to forgive myself and others. I'm excited about the future and all the possibilities it holds. Reading Diana's final words, Charles was devastated by the cruel irony of her contentment and optimism in those last days. She had finally found peace and happiness after years of struggle, only to have her life cut short when she had so much more to give to the world. As he closed the diary for the final time, Charles felt fundamentally changed by the experience of reading Diana's most private thoughts. The woman revealed in these pages was more complex, more thoughtful, and more generous than he had ever fully appreciated during their marriage or in the years since her death. Diana's diary had shown him not just her struggles and triumphs, but her remarkable capacity for growth, forgiveness, and love. She had transformed herself from a confused young bride into a powerful advocate for human dignity and compassion. Her ability to turn personal pain into purposeful action had indeed made her one of the most influential figures of her generation. The diary had also forced Charles to confront his own failures and limitations as a husband and partner. He could see now how his emotional reserve, his adherence to duty over feeling, and his inability to fully appreciate Diana's unique gifts had contributed to their marriage's failure. While he couldn't change the past, Diana's words had given him new insights into himself and his relationships. Most importantly, the diary had shown him Diana's continued love for their sons and her hopes for their futures. Her wisdom about parenting, her insights into William and Harry's characters, and her vision for their roles in the world would continue to guide Charles as he helped prepare them for their responsibilities. As king, Charles now understood more fully the legacy Diana had left, not just to their family but to the monarchy and the world. Her approach to royal duty, emphasizing compassion and direct engagement with people suffering, had indeed changed how the public viewed the royal family and what they expected from their leaders. The diary had been a gift, allowing Charles to finally understand and appreciate the remarkable woman Diana had been. While it could never undo the pain they had caused each other, it had brought healing and closure that he had not known he needed. Tomorrow he would return to his royal duties with renewed purpose and understanding, carrying with him Diana's lessons about the power of compassion, the importance of authentic engagement with the world, and the possibility of transformation even in the face of great challenges. The diary had shown him that Diana's true legacy lived on not just in their sons, but in the changed hearts and minds of people around the world who had been touched by her compassion and courage. In reading her words, Charles had discovered not just the woman he had lost, but the enduring impact of a life lived with purpose and love. In the days following his discovery of Diana's diary, Charles found himself fundamentally transformed by the experience. The intimate revelations contained within those pages had not only changed his understanding of Diana but had forced him to confront his own role in their failed marriage and his responsibilities as a father, king, and human being. The weight of Diana's words stayed with him as he returned to his royal duties, but rather than being a burden, they became a source of inspiration and guidance. He found himself approaching his responsibilities with a new sense of purpose, informed by Diana's insights about compassion, authentic engagement, and the power of using one's position to help those in need. Charles's first official engagement after reading the diary was a visit to a homeless shelter in London, an event that had been scheduled months earlier but now held special significance. As he walked through the facility, speaking with residents and volunteers, he found himself thinking about Diana's words about the importance of genuine human connection over formal protocol. Instead of the carefully orchestrated royal visit that had been planned, Charles spent extra time with each person he met, asking about their stories and truly listening to their responses. He found himself moved by their resilience and dignity in the face of hardship, understanding for the first time why Diana had been so passionate about working with marginalized populations. One young mother, holding her toddler son, told Charles about losing her job and home after her husband's death. As she spoke about her struggles to provide stability for her child, Charles was reminded of Diana's entries about wanting to be a voice for those who often don't have one. He made a mental note to follow up on the shelter's funding needs and to consider how the monarchy could provide more substantial support for homeless services. After the visit, Charles found himself reflecting on how Diana's approach to such engagements had differed from his own. Where he had traditionally focused on meeting officials and hearing reports about programs and statistics, Diana had always gone straight to the people being served, understanding that their stories were more important than any formal presentation. That evening, Charles called William and Harry to discuss his visit to the shelter. To his surprise, both his sons immediately understood the significance of his changed approach, having grown up with Diana's example of hands-on compassion. "Mummy always said that you can't really help people unless you understand their experiences," William observed during their conversation. "She taught us that our privilege comes with the responsibility to use it for people who need advocates." Harry added his own memories of Diana's humanitarian work. "I remember going with her to visit patients at the hospital when I was young. She always made time to sit with each person, to really see them as individuals rather than just people to meet quickly and move on from. It made a huge impression on me." These conversations with his sons revealed how deeply Diana's values had influenced their own approaches to royal duty. Charles realized that while he had been focused on teaching them about constitutional responsibilities and royal traditions, Diana had instilled in them something equally important: the understanding that royal service should be fundamentally about helping others. Inspired by his son's memories and his newfound understanding of Diana's philosophy, Charles began to restructure his approach to royal engagements. He instructed his staff to build more time into his schedule for genuine interaction with people, even if it meant attending fewer formal events overall. His next major engagement was a visit to a military rehabilitation center for veterans recovering from combat injuries. This was the type of cause Diana had championed, working with landmine victims and other casualties of war. As Charles met with veterans adjusting to life with prosthetic limbs or dealing with post-traumatic stress, he found himself drawing on Diana's insights about the healing power of human connection. One veteran, a young woman who had lost her leg in Afghanistan, spoke about feeling forgotten by society after her injury. Charles spent nearly an hour with her, listening to her story and learning about the challenges faced by disabled veterans seeking employment and social support. By the end of their conversation, he had committed to establishing a new initiative to provide better transition services for injured service members. The media coverage of these engagements began to reflect the change in Charles's approach. Reporters noted his increased emotional engagement with the people he met and his willingness to address difficult social issues more directly. Some compared his evolving style to Diana's legacy of compassionate activism, a comparison that Charles found both humbling and motivating. But the most significant impact of reading Diana's diary was on Charles's relationship with his sons. Armed with new understanding of Diana's hopes and concerns for William and Harry, he began approaching his role as their father with greater emotional openness and deeper appreciation for the lessons Diana had taught them. During a private family dinner at Balmoral, Charles found the courage to discuss Diana's diary with both his sons, sharing some of her insights while respecting the privacy of her more personal reflections. "Your mother wrote about her hopes for both of you," Charles told them. "She wanted William to know that being king doesn't mean losing yourself, that you can honor tradition while staying true to your own values. And, Harry, she wanted you to understand that even without inheriting the throne, you have crucial work to do in the world." William was particularly moved by this revelation. "Sometimes I worry about how to balance being authentic with royal responsibilities. It's helpful to know Mummy understood that struggle and believed it was possible to do both." Harry responded with characteristic emotion. "Mummy always made us feel like our hearts were our greatest assets, not something to hide or control. I'm glad she wrote about that, because it gives me permission to keep following her example of leading with compassion." These conversations led to deeper discussions about Diana's legacy and how it should influence their approach to royal service. Charles found himself sharing stories about Diana's humanitarian work and her insights about connecting with people who were suffering or marginalized. The three men began planning new initiatives that would honor Diana's memory while addressing contemporary challenges. They discussed establishing a foundation focused on mental health awareness, reflecting Diana's own struggles and her belief in the importance of addressing psychological well-being. They also talked about expanding support for victims of conflict and natural disasters, building on Diana's work with landmine victims. Charles's understanding of Diana's character also influenced his approach to his role as king. He began incorporating more of her emphasis on emotional intelligence and human connection into his official duties. When meeting with world leaders, he found himself asking more questions about the human impact of policies rather than focusing solely on political and economic considerations. During a state visit from an African leader whose country was dealing with a refugee crisis, Charles surprised diplomatic protocol officers by asking for time to meet with refugee representatives rather than limiting discussions to formal government meetings. His genuine interest in understanding the human dimensions of international issues reflected Diana's influence on his thinking about the responsibilities of leadership. The diary had also given Charles new insight into Diana's relationship with the media and her sophisticated understanding of how to use publicity for positive purposes. While he had always been more reserved about media engagement, he began to see the value in Diana's approach of leveraging attention to highlight important causes. He authorized a documentary about his environmental work that included more personal reflections and emotional content than he would have previously considered appropriate. The program showed Charles visiting communities affected by climate change and speaking openly about his fears for the planet's future. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with viewers appreciating this more vulnerable side of their king. Charles also began using social media more effectively to highlight charitable causes and social issues, understanding that Diana had been ahead of her time in recognizing the importance of direct communication with the public. His posts about mental health awareness, veteran support, and environmental conservation reached millions of people and inspired increased donations to relevant charities. The transformation in Charles's approach to his royal duties was noticed not just by the public, but by members of parliament and other political leaders. Several MPs commented on his increased engagement with social issues and his more emotionally resonant communication style. One longtime observer of the royal family noted, "His Majesty seems to have found a new confidence in addressing the human dimensions of the challenges facing our society. There's an emotional intelligence in his recent engagements that reminds many people of the late Princess Diana's approach to royal service." But perhaps the most meaningful impact of Diana's diary was on Charles's personal healing and growth. For 26 years, he had carried guilt and regret about their failed marriage, wondering what he could have done differently and struggling with the public perception that he had been inadequate as Diana's husband. Reading Diana's own words about their relationship, her acknowledgement of their fundamental incompatibility, and her generous assessment of his character had provided a healing that Charles hadn't known was possible. Her diary showed that she had understood their marriage's failure as a result of incompatibility rather than personal inadequacy on either side. Diana's continued respect and affection for him, despite their romantic failure, allowed Charles to forgive himself for the pain they had caused each other. Her words had shown him that it was possible to honor their shared history while accepting that they had been wrong for each other as spouses. This personal healing enabled Charles to speak more openly about Diana's legacy and their relationship. During a speech at a charity gala supporting causes Diana had championed, he paid tribute to her work and acknowledged his own learning process. "The Princess of Wales understood something that I am still learning," he said. "She knew that true royal service requires not just duty and dedication, but genuine emotional engagement with the people we serve. She showed us that vulnerability and compassion are strengths, not weaknesses, in leadership." The speech was widely praised for its honesty and emotional depth, marking a significant evolution in how Charles discussed both Diana and his own approach to royal service. As the months passed, Charles found that Diana's diary had become a source of ongoing guidance and inspiration. When facing difficult decisions about royal priorities or challenging social issues, he would often think about what Diana had written about leading with compassion and staying focused on human impact rather than institutional concerns. The diary had also strengthened his relationships with William and Harry, providing a shared foundation for understanding Diana's values and hopes for their family. They began holding regular family meetings to discuss how they could honor Diana's legacy through their work and personal choices. William, inspired by his mother's writings about the importance of mental health, expanded his advocacy work in that area, launching new initiatives to support young people struggling with psychological challenges. Harry continued his work with veterans and disadvantaged youth, approaches that clearly reflected Diana's influence on his understanding of royal service. Charles realized that Diana's diary had given him not just insight into the past, but guidance for the future. Her words had shown him how to be a better father, a more effective king, and a more compassionate human being. The woman who had struggled so much during their marriage had, through her private writings, provided him with the wisdom he needed to fulfill his responsibilities more effectively. In quiet moments in his study, Charles would sometimes reread passages from Diana's diary, finding new insights and continued inspiration in her words. The leather-bound journal had become one of his most treasured possessions, not because it represented their romantic relationship, but because it contained the wisdom and compassion of a remarkable woman who had used her unique position to make the world better. The discovery of Diana's diary had indeed brought Charles to his knees, but not just with grief for what had been lost. He had been humbled by Diana's generosity, inspired by her courage, and transformed by her insights about the true meaning of royal service. As he looked toward the future of his reign and his family's legacy, Charles carried with him Diana's belief that privilege should be used to serve others, that emotional connection is essential to effective leadership, and that even in the face of great challenges, it is possible to transform pain into purpose. The diary had given him the greatest gift possible, a deeper understanding of the woman who had shared his life and given him his sons, and the wisdom to honor her memory through more compassionate and effective service to the people of his realm and the world beyond. Diana's words would continue to guide him for the rest of his life, ensuring that her legacy of compassion and courage would live on through the monarchy she had helped to transform.